Give us the ballot, and we will no longer plead to end police brutality against people of color. Give us the ballot, and we will transform our schools into places where equal opportunity to learn is no longer determined by zip code or standardized testing, can no longer be used to discriminate against the poor. Give us the ballot, and we will find our legislative halls. We will fill our legislative halls with people of goodwill and send to the sacred halls of Washington congressmen and women who will fight for the justice of all mankind. Give us the ballot, and we will place judges on the benches who will do justly and love mercy, and we will place at the head of the states governors who have felt not only the thing of the human, but the glow of the divine. Not only we need to vote, but we need to know the people we are voting for. What do they stand for? Are they people of moral integrity? Will they be fighting for the same issues that I personally care about? With this, I want to welcome you to the remedy as we discuss voting, your voice, and your vote. I want to welcome everyone to our show today. Special welcome to each and every one of you. Um, I'm excited about the show, but I'm also a little skeptical about the show today. Excited because it's a chance for me to speak to all of you all over again. But we're going to be talking about politics, and usually politics tend to bring people anxiety, and tend to give stress. Some people are even afraid to talk about things. Um, and rarely do conversations about politics provide clarity or a sense of forwardness. And people usually leave the conversation feeling resentful or angry or upset or frustrated. Now, to make matters worse, here at the remedy, not only we're going to talk about politics, but we're going to talk about politics and religion and the same bowl. That in itself is a recipe for disaster, or is it? Um, Many people have the mindset that politics and religion should not mix. I mean, you hear this all the time. So, gang members of the remedy, I want to say welcome. What are your thoughts on that statement? On politics and religion should not mix. Let's begin with something that is minuscule before we blow this up today. So I just want to hear what are your thoughts on that statement?
Um, Personally, I think um, that in one way, it's like a statement. Like, I really believe in like separation of church and state, especially in a country where not everybody has the same religious beliefs, um,
Hmm.
and that people who aren't like Christians should be able to live their life not under the parameters of Christianity, because like that's not what their personal belief system is. But to say that religious people can't be political or have political views is a little off base, because I mean everyone's gonna have an opinion, like, and we should be expected to care about our country and want better for it because it directly affects us. Like,
Mm,
people are also affected by politics. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well
Um,
said.
I think the thing is that like we we kind of there are like a lot of cliches that happen that we fall into. And the reason, so one is like the idea of like the separation of church and state, it doesn't mean that a political figure can't be religious or that a religious person can't be political, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Dr. King was a political figure, but he was also a
Mm-hmm.
pastor. Actually, the civil rights movement and the suffrage movement were all led by people of faith.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think where that comes
Correct.
from is that people who left the tyranny of England at the time needed to come here, and the Church of England um, prosecuted people of specific religions, so they came over here for religious freedom, right? Because the monarchy was tied to religion. So when they came
Mm-hmm.
here, the idea was to have that separation so that you can live your life and not have your religious views be put the religious views of the ruling government be put on you. But
Mm-hmm.
since then, I think people kind of use it. Like I just saw something this week where it said 500 religious leaders of faith have endorsed political candidates, and then people were like, "I thought it was separation of church and state," and I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not what that is. Like religious leaders have always gotten into politics. Our money says, "In God we trust." The Pledge of Allegiance added, God, a line of God in it. So while I don't believe that one religious denomination should be, or in actuality, I agree with Melody to the point where I think, like, if you are an atheist or a Muslim or whatever it is, a Sikh, Hindu, whatever religion, you shouldn't have to like feel the oppression of the Judeo-Christian system. Um, Even though that's where we get a lot of our laws from, um, forced upon you, to live your life in this country. So it's interesting because, like, again, it's like it's a dichotomy, right? Because then also you have like a constitutional amendment that gives you the freedom of religion, but then you see how people like use that in politics to kind of also oppress us. So it's actually a little more complicated than just like a kind of a sentence. And I feel like maybe I've rambled, but it's just, it's easier said. I'm still also stuck on the fact that we're a gang. So forgive me. So that being said, religion and politics is always mixed, right? I think people try to say it when they don't want to talk, or if they want to like kind of like leave the subject, or like there are a few things that you never talk about. What is it? I think it's like sex, religion, politics, and something else. But you know, I think it's like a get out of free card that people, when people don't want to be challenged on what
Mm-hmm.
they believe in or want to have like a serious conversation.
Yeah. Mandy, any last word?
I agree with Melody, Cousin Rudy, 100%. There should be a separation between the church and the state, because I think it's redundant that "in God we trust" is even on the dollar itself, because this is, in my opinion, a godless state. We've seen so many killings and police brutality and violence in this country. And I feel like to say "in God we trust" is irresponsible. And a lot of people end up being misrepresented as well when we decide that church and state should merge together. You have issues with Planned Parenthood or like things of that nature. So I absolutely agree. It should be separate. People should be able to live their lives the way they want to, as long as they're not hurting anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it's Markel, I don't know if you have any issues or if you can hear us, so I'll come back to you. But
I can.
you good?
Yeah.
All right. So we're talking about whether or not the question we're trying to ponder upon for a second is um, this question on religion, politics, and religion should not mix. Um, and we are hearing from each other, all
All right.
right.
I lost you at that last part.
Your thoughts
It's
on
from me.
politics and religion. in regards to whether or not they should
Okay.
mix or not mix.
On the biblical issues, right? If what
We're
beliefs
having problem
are
hearing you, so we'll come back to you again, Markel.
all right.
Your quality, the sound quality is really bad. But what I wanted to say is, talking politics, in regards to talking politics, politics is seen in such a bad light that the word itself, um, um, has become synonymous with with everything that is evil or corrupted or deceptive. And I think the Christian faith, as a result of that, um, um, we have used that as as reasons why we should not mingle or we should not get involved. Um, but as Woody mentioned, and Melody and Wendy and even Mendy, um, it is true that, um, our government, the government that, I mean, that the core of this country is based upon written constitution, which guarantee certain rights, or God-given rights, to be able to protect, um, um, to be protected. Um, and so we elect people who supposed to represent us, and and they are elected by the citizens of that particular country, and they are elected by, well, let me just say this, by popular vote, and we will talk about that a little bit later, and by legislate majority. Now, having said all that, when you look at, our role, our Christian role within the government, do we have a role to play? Um, when I was reading about this, one of the verse that came to mind is the one that when Jesus, talks about your love your neighbor as yourself. To me, that's an indication right there that we ought to get involved in politics, because that's the place where we can make sure that our neighbors are being taken care of. We're not just worrying about ourselves, but we're worrying about each other's welfare or well-being. So to say politics and religion cannot mix, um, I'm still trying to grapple with that thought, and going into the Bible to see where exactly that came from. Because the political climate of the time when Jesus was around, he talked about what was going on, but he also talked about a different kingdom, that his kingdom was not of this world. However, he came to set the captives free, and he did that in such a way that people will say, well, he did all that without getting involved in politics. But really, did he? When you look at Martin Luther King, for example, and the civil rights leaders of his time, those were Christians who were fighting for human rights. Okay. And just last week, I was watching a gentleman who's well known in the Adventist community, and he was very elegant and eloquent in the way that he talked about, how, we have lost our way, because now there are a lot of Christians are getting involved more and more into politics, and because of that we have lost our way. I just don't get it. Like, how do you not get involved? And how is getting involved in politics is losing your way? How do we make sure that our brothers and our sisters' right or well-being are taken care of if we don't get involved in politics?
I don't think it's our job to, I understand God says, love your neighbor as yourself. I get that. But I don't think it's our job to impose our own biases on other people. I think we need to look at whether or not that person is going to be hurt by the things that we say or the things that we do before we even try to make any type of changes in terms of politics as Christians. because there are rules like in the LGBTQ community, a lot of states still don't allow them to be married when they're not doing anything wrong. But because there are so many religious political leaders that are making these rules and enforcing these rules, these people aren't allowed to live their lives or benefit from a married relationship.
Yeah.
And can we talk about the hypocrisy of some of those same people who like cheat on their wives or
Exactly.
or are caught in a bathroom, soliciting same homosexual, relationships. So I think to kind of piggyback off of that, we shouldn't use our religion. I think the problem is that religion is used as a moral authority, right? That because you believe something, you have this like moral authority, and by that you are going to rule, um, um, what people think and feel based off of this idea that you have, and the laws are based off of that. You know what I mean? And like that's where it doesn't work, because if I if I am a Christian, and I am, there are a lot of things that I believe in that doesn't align with the quote unquote little c conservatism of Christian that's propagated, throughout, right? And it doesn't make me less Christian. It just makes me um um it just makes me I just have a different I just allow people to be in different spaces, you know what I mean? And so I think that's what happens, where you see oftentimes, and it turns people off, because I have a lot of friends who I talk to who they're like, oh, I didn't know you were Christian, and I'm like, yeah, I am. And they're like, oh, but this, and I'm like, well, the two can live in the same space. Just because I'm not in your face, like, trying to convince you of something else, doesn't mean that I can't have like a liberal or a progressive view on certain things. And I think that's
Mhm.
where oftentimes the two don't, they collide, right? Because the other thing that I know we're going to start to get into is that the idea of large C conservatism has co-opted what the Christian movement is, or co-opted in the sense that like there's an idea of like what that is. It's the same thing about being a, excuse me, patriot, you know what I mean, or being in the military. Like they've co-opted what this idea is, where in every group, Christian, military, politics, I forgot what other thing I said. There are liberal and progressives in all of it. You know what I mean? And so like
Mhm.
one group doesn't own it. But the idea of ruling on this like moral kind of high ground is where I think it clashes.
Yes.
All right. Melody.
I mean, I'm the same. I think that a lot of the time we say that, well, I guess politicians, because I'm not one, but we kind of hide behind the defense of, oh, we're making these judgments based on our religion, and because we're Christians, we have to follow what God would want us to do. But God didn't tell you to impose your beliefs on other people. He, like, that was never
Well,
his thing.
he
And
challenged us
so
to go and spread the gospel. So, and,
spreading the gospel doesn't mean to restrict other
all right,
people, though.
Yeah.
correct.
And I think that's something that gets like misconstrued a lot. Like, I can spread the gospel by inviting my friends to church, by talking to them about God. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna vote against their right for an abortion. Like, just because I want to personally do it doesn't mean I understand the situation that they're going through.
Yeah, and I found myself like really confused about it. It felt like politicians were never making sense, because they would say, this is a free country, all this stuff, but then they put their little religious beliefs into certain laws that they would pass. But then I'm just like, but you guys have children in cages, and you guys won't allow people that are seeking refuge into the country. So I always just like, I just don't understand how you can say, well, these people can't have rights, and we're also going to oppress these people, but we're still one country. I'm like, is this truly what you think God would want, that you would treat people poorly? Yeah, I
I feel
don't know.
like I feel like the Constitution needs to be reevaluated because the same Constitution that said "In God We Trust" is the same Constitution that imposed the 3/4 rule. So I agree with you 100%.
So yeah, let me just say, and I don't want you guys to think we off topics at all, because I think we need to start there, since we're coming from a Christian perspective. um, and then we'll dive into this a little bit more. The scriptures talk about the role of government, and how we should respond to the government. And in fact, much of our laws, as Mandy you just pointed out, and the rest of the ladies, much of the laws are taken from the Bible, from the book of
Right.
Deuteronomy, for example. So I think it's fair that Christian should be concerned about politics, and that God is also concerned about politics. There are three things that I know that God established. He government, family, and there's a third one. I can't seem to remember it right now, but it will come to me. So, but here's the thing now. At some point, Jesus was asked that question. Um, many of you remember, when we talk about paying taxes to Caesar, and Jesus said, "Well, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and render to God what belongs to God." Um, how should believers think, or should I say, how should we relate to those in the political realm? Um, how should we relate to them? Because right now, I mean, it's when you think about our government, there are those that we really don't like, and I praise God that I don't have to like you to love you, because I'm commanded to love my enemies. There are some people that it's hard for us to like. Let me just put a disclaimer before we move on, okay? This show, we're going to talk about politics, but here on the Remedy, we are not here to promote a particular candidate for the elections. I'm just putting a disclaimer out there, okay? Everyone, you all have the freedom to vote, and we have been given freedom to voice our opinion, and I'm just challenging you to think carefully before you go and cast your ballot, to know what you are doing, to educate yourself. So that's the disclaimer, okay? Having said that, um, like I was saying earlier, there are some people in power that I am forced to love, even though I dislike them to the core. What my question to you guys this morning is, how should we relate to those in the political realm?
I'd like to say something on that. There is nothing wrong with disliking somebody that's in power. Um, uh, uh, and if, for those of you in the public and those of you that here that don't know, I am a Republican, registered Republican, but I would say I'm a center-leaning Republican. So there's a lot of things that where me and the Republican Party break apart on, and I join hands with the Democratic, um, join hands with it. But to your thing about disliking somebody, I'll say straight up about Trump. Okay, a lot of people dislike Trump, and
Amen.
that's fine. That's fine because he's very rude. He's very crass. He says things that are very, like they would say it in Haitian style. These are the kind of things that you don't say. Um, the problem I have with people and Trump is whether he does good, whether he does bad, because he's Trump, they don't like it, and that's where I think is wrong. And I'm not a Trump supporter by any stretch of the imagination. But I always end up sounding like a Trump supporter because I'm like, what you just said wasn't true. about like, just because you hate the guy doesn't mean you have to keep lying. You have to lie about something that he did. He does plenty for you to say that are true to still show that he's a terrible person. For you to take even something that he does that we remotely good just because it's Trump's name on it, that you don't even acknowledge that it's something that he did that was good. That's the problem. Well, that's with any politician. Obama did a Republicans against Obama. He wore a tan suit, and that was like devil incarnate. There was nothing wrong with him wearing a tan suit. So if you dislike or disagree with somebody, if you dislike somebody for whatever reason that you dislike them, there's no excuse for you to hate even when they do something that's positive.
Can I say something about
I want
that?
to say something too.
I think the thing is that when it comes to there are a couple different things. I think we just live in a world where politics have become tribal, right? And so, we've decided that we've aligned ourselves to either the right or the left. And so, because of that, sometimes we sit in an echo chamber and we put on blinders, and whatever that side did is wrong, and whatever our side did is right. And so there is that, but then there's actual policies. And so I think the thing is that specifically when it comes to Trump, when you say that some people lie, well, it's hard to distinguish when he's had so many lies himself. And so I think going back to the original subject about politics and religion, I think that's one of the reasons why people recoil from not only politics or politicians is because we just assume that they're always lying because a lot of times they are, or they're misleading, or excuse me, they say something that's like a half true, just because that idea of being in power is more important than your integrity. And it's hard sometimes to see past the fray to really look for people with integrity. And so for me, um, I like Jimmy, I have no problem with you being a Republican. I would ask questions. Are you a social conservative, a fiscal conservative? Which I think there used to be a nuanced difference, right? And now it's not. Now it's like right and left. And it's like we're supposed to like not like each other now because we have like a D or an R next to our name, which I think is ridiculous. I think part of what's good about this show right now is that you stand for what you believe in. I know, you're a gun-toting, Second Amendment, blah blah blah, but I can still have a conversation with you and like not feel like attacked or disrespected. And I think that's where we're losing part of like why people also don't want to talk about politics and religion now, because we feel like once we state our views, or once you think you know one thing about us, you think you know everything. And then, then it becomes like a defense almost as a conversation, as opposed to a conversation.
Because here's what normally happens with politicians or politics. If you side with them, all of their views now become your views, and I don't think
Right.
that's true. I think we
Right.
view things differently. We might find some things in common with that person, but it's like, oh, you siding with them, so
Right.
you believe this, that, and the third. You believe this, that, and that's not always the case. But once you claim, it's like high school, right? You with that clique, you with that clique. Whatever that clique do, you was part of it. Whether you was there that day or not there that day, we just assume you would have done the same thing they did because you with that clique. And that's kind of what politicians is and politics is. And when you on the side of either or, red or blue, that's kind of where you fall.
Yep. I agree 100%. And then it's like you can say you don't have to crucify everything that he does, but let's go back to Hitler. Hitler was a
Right.
terrible person. So just because he did certain things right doesn't mean that we have to discredit all the terrible things that he has done or said. I mean, he was a homicidal maniac. I don't care if he took the puppy out the tree or the kitten out the tree and said it's a kitty. He was a homicidal maniac. So
Right.
I think it's important, and I think I understand why a lot of people recoil, because it's like you don't want to be part of either gang, because you really don't, you don't want to have that attached to your name. So
Right.
I feel like sometimes you can not see, but finding out like a certain person supports certain beliefs does make me like question my relationship. But I still feel like in that same respect, like of course there are people on either side of the political party that you're just like, oh, I don't want to be associated with you. Or, oh no, you're still cool, even if we don't agree on the same political ideas. But I do think sometimes it is something to consider.
Now I'm gonna ask you guys to switch gear just for a little bit. We're gonna talk about a different aspect of politics. I know there are Christians who are watching the show right now, and on election day, many of them believe that the sovereign God sits on his throne and with majesty and mystery, and he does whatever he does. He does whatever he wants. So there are those who believe that if you are in church and you believe in God and you believe that God is in control, then you have to believe that he is the one who sets those in power. And so God is the one who set our presidents, our magistrates, our Congress people. So God is in control of that. I want to hear your perspective on that part, because to me, um, I think it's dangerous to think that way. But I mean, I've spoke to some Christians who are really, really, really strong when it comes to God's sovereignty and God's power, and that God is the one who set up kings and put them down and so forth. Your thoughts on that, Mandy?
I think my God is a good God. He is a just God. I feel like the devil had a lot to do with the last election. When it came to what the people wanted, it was very clear that they were on God's side and they did not want this man in office. But the devil, the Electoral College, decided otherwise, and that's the situation now. So I believe that God, he'll tell us what he thinks we should do, but at the end of the day, just like with anything else, it's our choice. The same thing with voting. So that's my opinion on that.
Before you guys go on, we have someone who's here with us today. He's a perfect guy for today's conversation. Marcus Paul, first of all, I want to take a moment to say thank you. This is the last minute. He just said yes minutes ago, at the beginning of the show, to come on board and talk to us. Marcus, I know you've been involved in politics for a while now. For those of us who are watching and don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we have some questions for you?
Well, what about myself do you want to know is the real question.
From the political side, tell us a little bit. I know you were warning here in Philadelphia. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll move forward from there.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Marcus Paul. I entered the realm of politics, I could say, in 2014. I started off as an intern for a state representative in the state of PA. I worked with them for about 2 years. Got involved in an environmental nonprofit that did a lot of political work throughout the city of Philadelphia and the southeastern region of Pennsylvania. And in 2018, I ran for state senate in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, I did not win, but I have been, really involved in the political scene in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, as well as, the tri-state area in the PA region.
So, Marcus, I know we have some questions for you, and one of the questions that we want to ask you, and Mandy just mentioned how the devil was involved in one and God was involved in another one, and jokingly, but I want to ask if you could clarify for us um, the popular vote and the electoral college. Break it down, like break politics for dummies. I don't know if there's a book like that out there, because I think there's still a lot of confusion as to what that is. How is it
Mhm.
possible that the people can choose who they want um, for for the presidency, yet because of the electoral college, um, we can be faced with something else.
Right. So the biggest thing about the electoral college is practically the numbers. Everybody sees the electoral votes, but they don't know what constitutes the electoral votes. Electoral votes are made up by the amount of U.S. representatives you have in your country, as well as your 2 senators. So you're always guaranteed. Every state is guaranteed at least 3 electoral votes because you have 2 senators, and some states have a low enough population where they're only going to have 1 representative. So, in states like California, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, you see astronomical, amounts of electoral votes because they have really high populations.
Mhm.
And that was the key to the 2016 election. You can explain it how you want or believe how it happened the way you want, but the key thing was Hillary Clinton won a lot of states that had a very big population, and the battleground states that we like to call, like the Floridas, the Wisconsins, the Ohio's, and Pennsylvania's, those states that Trump won, he won by a very small margin. Like, I know in 2016, he won Pennsylvania by less than 175,000 votes. For a state that has 8 million people in it, that's a very small margin of victory. So when you add up the Californias that Clinton won, you add up the Oregons, the Washington states, and the New Yorks. When you win the popular vote by 4 million votes, you got to think, well, how many people are in those states?
Mhm.
And then the states that Trump won, what was the margin in which he won? Because if you win by a great margin, therefore you're going to win the popular vote. But if you win by a small margin, your opponent can win by a greater amount, but you won the votes that mattered.
Mhm.
And whoever wins the popular vote in that respective state, the electoral college are quote unquote faithless electors, but they have to submit all of their votes towards the candidate who wins the popular vote in that state.
I mean, I don't know if you know, I know that in history it's happened 5 times
Mm-hmm.
that the person who's won the popular vote didn't win the electoral college. It's only
Mm-hmm.
happened about 5 times. But I think it's important for the viewers to know why the electoral college came about. And I'm not sure if you can, I know that it's based off of slavery and 3/5 of the man and
Mm-hmm.
the South wanting to be represented more. If you can, I think it's important that the viewers also know a little bit about that so that they can understand why so many people today feel that we should get rid of the electoral college vote.
Right. So voting is a rich man's game. Well, in the beginning of the United States, voting was a rich man's game. And when I say rich man, I mean rich white man. Uh, when the United States was founded, in order for you to vote, there wasn't an age requirement. It was a land requirement. You had to own a certain amount of things. You had to have a certain amount of things in order for you to cast your vote. So with the electoral college, the way they balanced that out to make the way they aimed to balance that out was to make it so, all right, if we do let these quote unquote peasants vote and we let the rich people vote, we can have people who are both rich and poor decide who wins. So let's not leave it up. Let's not leave this great election who is going to determine who runs our country in the hands of really poor people or really rich people. We can choose people from certain states, and those people will allow us to determine who is the president.
So with that being said, my question is, when you tell people go vote, your vote counts and things of that sort, and they go out and vote, but the electoral vote more than likely can still override the popularity vote. Does
But
your
it's
It's
vote
only
really,
not
happened
count?
5 times in history, so that
So
just
is it
answers
really
the
a
question,
democracy?
right?
the best way I can describe it, like I know I've told Jimmy this so many times over the years, in terms of the presidential election, it don't really matter. Like, it don't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of every election outside of the presidential election, it matters 100%.
So the
And
electoral
and to
college,
and Go ahead. I'm sorry.
the Electoral College doesn't influence the votes on like a local level.
No, not at all.
But that,
If-
but that's also
but-
because the president can, like, if the local senates and things like that come up with a bill and all that stuff, right? It has to go to the president to either sign it or veto it, correct?
Right.
So if the money and electoral votes matter and they put the president in place, they're going to put who's going to make decisions that will benefit the people who make money.
Well, of course, that's the biggest thing, with especially like with the president's cabinet, whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, the people that they nominate are the people who are going to run the country. The president doesn't really run the country. It's his cabinet and the Senate that run the country. Because anybody that the president nominates for any position has to be confirmed by the Senate. He can't just do it on his own.
Well.
So that's the crazy thing about it.
Donald Trump has a lot of people who have not been confirmed by the Senate who are in quote unquote interim positions that are making policies that directly affect us.
Right. So the biggest thing in terms of nominations is when a seat is voided. Like for example, the Supreme Court seat. We had that situation in 2016 with President Obama. I think it was Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia died, and he nominated Merrick Garland. Well, since he nominated Merrick Garland, he had to wait for the Senate to approve him. They never approved him, and the reason why is, well, obviously you play politics. I don't want somebody else's guy to be in that position. I want my guy to be in that position. So Republicans waited. History proves itself in terms of one party holding the White House for more than 2 terms. It's happened, I think, maybe 3 times in history. You had it in the 80s with Reagan and Bush. You had it in the 40s with Franklin Roosevelt, who had office for an unprecedented 4 terms. And then you have another time in right after the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was elected. He was elected again. He was assassinated. Andrew Johnson took over, and he stood in office for 8 years. So that is the only 3 times in history where you've had one party control the White House for more than the typical 2 terms. And with Obama in 2016 and then Trump getting elected, they filibustered him, getting his nominee approved, so they could get their guy in. We didn't know it was going to end up being, what was that gentleman's name?
Neil Gorsuch.
Yeah, we didn't know it was going to be him, but we knew it was going to be somebody who, was a conservative through and through. And
So
that's where we are right now.
I want to follow up on something that you said. You said how, and I think you said how voting for the president isn't important, but then in that same realm, I want to kind of like almost say it is, because of what you just said, the policies that are enacted by the people he decides, i.e., education, Betsy DeVos, housing, Ben Carson, what's happened to the EPA, what's happened to a lot of policies that direct us, that directly affects us. So voting for president isn't, and also judges, right? Like, we're looking at the judicial system in this country. It's been changed for a generation, right? There are a lot of people who have been appointed judges who have no qualifications. I think one guy, if you look at the hearing that happened, I can't remember his name, but even the Republican senator from Louisiana, Kennedy, was like, wait, you mean you've never even been in a courtroom? And he said no, and that guy got appointed. So while we are still trying to, I think we almost minimalize the idea of like the presidency, but we don't talk about the judges and also the policies that are enacted by the people that they put in office. Because if you care about the environment, then that's a red flag. If you care about, if you care about social justice and also policing, that playbook that was left in office by the Obama administration was thrown out. the idea of a pandemic playbook was thrown out, and so that group or council that was that pandemic, I forgot what it's called, was thrown out under this. So it is important at the end of the day, right? Because those policies or those people that have been confirmed in office have directly affected us, specifically with the pandemic.
Right. You know, the funny thing about that is I love the irony in those three things that you listed, because you said, you know, the pandemic fund that we had, the EPA, and how they're all being, you know, all the things are being rolled back by President Trump. And at the same time, you know, people are saying Obama this, Obama that. But the funny thing is, if you look at the creation of the EPA, it was a Republican president who created the EPA.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm not saying, I get
like,
that.
you know, I just find it irony in how I find it ironic how the rhetoric that is used in today's political game is always about the now and never about the future. You know, some politicians always talk about building a greater America, you know, like Trump, make America great again. You know, with Obama, yes, we can, and hope for the future and change. With even you know, Joe Biden now saying stronger together, better together, and Hillary Clinton forward. Everybody gives you the rhetoric that they're aiming to make the country better in the future, but you know, on the presidential level, it's kind of difficult because you have 370 million people to worry about, and you're not going to please everyone. The biggest thing with politicians, especially with Trump today, is there's a certain, like I think earlier you guys said, there's a certain moral standard. There's a moral standard that there's a moral role that the president is supposed to play. He's supposed to play. He's supposed to unite. He's supposed to, you know, be a voice of calm, a voice of reason. But President Trump, it's impossible for him to do that because he's never been somebody who's had to answer to anyone. He's only had to answer to himself and maybe his family members. And I don't want to go on a bashing of President Trump because his character is something that we can all agree on. It's horrible. But his politics, not so much. He hasn't really been a bad politician. He hasn't really been a bad president. I think the biggest thing is his character overshadows his accomplishments.
But
and that's a lot of things.
I think we can have a discussion about whether or not we like Donald Trump, but I do know that what happened, I mean, I think that's for another day, but what I'm talking about is the importance of that office and the role that they play with putting people in positions that have policies that directly affect us. When I look at some of the policies that's happened with housing, HUD, with education, and again with the EPA, I'm not talking about the parties that put those things in place. I understand what the EPA has done. I'm talking about putting in people who are not qualified in those positions because they were lobbyists. And so I know that happens on the right and the left, but I think it's really important for us to, when we're talking about how it doesn't matter who the president is, it does matter because of the appointments that he puts in place with those policies that trickle down. And so that to me is what I'm trying to, get across that, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, so that's what it is.
So the biggest thing, whether qualified or unqualified, the biggest thing about policy on the federal level is it has and always will be designed to be vague. It's supposed to be left up to the state's interpretation and how that policy is going to be enacted and enforced. So, even though these practices, by Ben Carson and by Scott Pruitt, who was the former head of the EPA, and Betsy DeVos, their policies may be weird, it may be wrong, but at the same time, it's up to that respective state's government and state's governor to determine how that policy is going to be interpreted. Federal policy is made to be very vague, very implicit, very explicit, and states have to make it implicit. We have to say, okay, well, this is what they told us, and now that's what made slavery legal. That's what makes slavery through prison legal. It's all a matter of how you interpret the law. And, you know, every state does everything differently. You know, you can't, you know, the same state that says, you know, Betsy DeVos says school choice is one thing. One state can say, yeah, school choice all the way. We're going to build more charter schools and take away funding from public school districts. And at the same time, another state can say, oh, you said school choice is an option. All right, so let's find avenues where we can increase funding in our public schools and take away from, you know, these charter schools that are taking money from public schools and not putting it back in. So it's
I'm
all a
glad that
matter
you
of
brought that up.
interpretation of how that policy is, it's all a matter of interpretation from the state of how the federal policy is passed.
I kind of have a question. I'm sure mine is going to jump back in and take control here in a second. But I always wondered, like, when you look at policies, especially old policy, or things that we still abide by today that were in like the Constitution years ago, and we've noticed and we all can agree that time has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it take so long for policies, so to speak, or laws to be changed? Like, I know people are still talking about, you know, marijuana is being legal in certain places and other places, but not across the board. Why can't that just be at the approval of the president, in a sense, to go ahead and say this day going forward, this law is going to change going forward? Why does it have
Because
to
the
go?
United States Constitution doesn't circumvent your state constitution.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. So why is it that it has to go through so many different channels before, if we know, if the world can look at this and say, hey, this is wrong, the world can see it. We need this needs to be changed by now. Like, it's been riding from the beginning of the time. By now, 2020, everyone is in agreement that this needs to be changed. Why does it have to go through this level, the state level, and then the presidential level before it can be changed? Why can't the president just say, hey, we've all come to agreement and this needs to be changed going forward, this is what's happening?
That's all difference of opinion.
Yeah, but I think it goes back. So one thing that we have, you know, your state has its own constitution, and then there's a federal constitution. And so the reason why it can't be, well, the president says for everyone, is because what the state of New York may agree with is not what the state of Alabama may agree with, right? And so unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to think about it, is it's like we have 50 countries within one overall arching country.
Amen.
So
is that a good way? Is that a good way to have things, in a sense? Because that means what people are doing in California, and they cannot get in trouble for it, but nothing's wrong with it. They're not hurting or harming anybody. But if I do it here in the state of Georgia, I can be penalized and go to prison for it. It just doesn't make sense.
Right. What some people will tell you is, if you don't like it, move to California. I mean, unfortunately, but that it's just the system that we have, and it goes back to, I understand what you're saying, that like the reason, again, going back to why that was done, is because that's how the founding fathers, didn't like the tyranny of what was happening in Great Britain, right? And
Exactly.
So when they came up with the Constitution in the United States, it was to give more states more autonomy of how they want to govern their states and those policies. And so, I mean, if we really want to talk about it, the pandemic is the perfect example of that. You had there was no federalized system, right? And so it was a mess. How New York handled it was very different than how Texas and Florida handle it, how different than Iowa handle it. And so I do think that there are some things that, you know, then it becomes this idea of like, do you believe in like state rights versus federal rights, which is something that we haven't spoken about on this call, but that was also one of the things that the founding fathers really wanted states to have. So that's why each state has like their own constitution and how they govern. And so there are certain laws that we know. For instance, like, you know, Capital One murder. It's a law that like it's in every state now. Whether or not it's a death penalty or you know, you're on death row, not death row, life in prison, it depends on how each states enact those policies. So I think that's sort of back to what Marcus was saying earlier, and how each state is how each state takes on policies. I mean, the thing is so yeah, I was going to bring up an example of something that happens, tells that kind of, when you have people who vote for something, I think about like in Florida, they had put it in a referendum to change the Florida Constitution, that people who had felonies, nonviolent felonies, could now vote because they were disenfranchised. And so guess what? That meant a lot of people were going to be able to vote. The Republicans, unfortunately, in this scenario, decided, well, we don't want these people to vote. So now they've implemented a kind of like a poll tax, like that they have to pay all of these fees. That is where the people made a decision, and then politicians came and tried to like take the decision away from the people. And that happens a lot too. You know what I mean? So I understand the idea of the frustration of like, does our vote counts? Because that's a perfect example of people using that exercise the right to vote, changing the Constitution, and politicians then finding a way to circumvent the will of the people, sort of thing.
So I do have a question. Marcus, I don't know. I know he had to leave at 1 o'clock, but I'm hearing the conversation and I can't help it but to ask whether or not, because one of the things that I keep hearing, and Jimmy from the get-go told us that he was a Republican, and we always hear, the two-party system, the Democrat and the Republican. Are they really helpful, or should we look into something else for the future?
Give me some
I
else.
think
Let me hear your thoughts. Well, why do you think we should look for something else?
because they messed things up so far for years. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the two-party system does not work because things that shouldn't be political end up being political. Why is it that science is something that is disputed? Like, I don't think that climate change should be a Democrat versus Republican issue. We all breathe the same air. We'll die at the same rates. Well, not really, because environmental racism, but like it affects all of us. Like, it's not like somebody who voted one way is not going to be affected just because their representative doesn't believe in climate change.
I'm gonna put you guys on the spot right now. What does this election means to you guys, the young people? Um, what do you think this election that we're gonna have in November? What do you think this election actually means, if any?
Well, for me personally, I know me and my friends, like, this is the first time that we're voting in a presidential election. I voted in the primaries, and that was like, I didn't expect to feel so cool about it, but I did. I was like, oh my gosh, like this, I actually feel like an adult now. But I think this election kind of represents like the direction I want like the country to go in. Even if I'm not 100% happy with either candidate, I know who I'm voting for, and I know who I hope wins. But I think like on a more personal level, this is kind of like the first step towards if I want to hear completely. Like I think a lot of us are at my generation at least, we're at the age where like it's not, we have roots here, but not so deep that like we feel trapped,
Mm-hmm.
So this is really figuring out if this is the place where I want to spend the rest of my life.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody that can't vote yet, I mean, this is the second, I guess, like presidential election that I'm really like seeing and stuff, like firsthand. Because I was kind of young and I was like, oh yeah, just Obama, But I mean, it's just weird because it's just like, I know at the end of the day, like, it's not up to me. I feel like that's the thing. Like, I don't have any control over who's going to end up being president. I don't really have a say. I have to leave it up to the adults, which I'm just like, do I really want to? You know, I'm like, it feels like they failed us in the past because they put somebody in office who I don't like or respect. You know, his policies I just don't agree with at all. So, I mean, I guess for people like me that can't vote, we're just kind of just like, we hope for the best, but we kind of just, I'm expecting the worst, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Can
All
I
right.
say something, Wendy? I want to say that you do have an option. You can still be active even though you're not voting, right? There are things that you can still do, even though you're younger. So, you know, you can help register people. You can go help get people the things that they need. So there are ways that you can still be active even though you yourself can't practice participate in voting this time. And so, and also like just being informed and
Yeah.
sharing information that is very truthful and
Mhm.
impactful is also a good way of letting your voice be heard while not being able to participate physically with a ballot yet. So I just wanted to kind of say that.
I want to piggyback on what you said, Rudy. Like that is very important. Even though you're not of voting age, your voice in essence can be louder than those who can vote. Because I think have the power to vote, people who have the power to vote, they just sometimes most people go into the voting booth and they, hit straight Democratic ticket or hit straight Republican ticket and think they did their job. But
Mhm.
for you who's young, you can hold other people accountable to make sure that your future, and by the time you are of voting age, is secure in a point where you're pleased or getting to a point where you will be pleased. That's the
Mhm.
biggest
Right.
thing.
Mhm.
And for those who do vote, it's a matter of them becoming more informed and learning, especially about, earlier with the two-party system. I think the biggest thing that the founding fathers did was they actually created the country with the intent of not creating a two-party system.
Yeah.
They wanted to they feared that tyranny. So the biggest thing is, over time people said, let's merge all of our ideas. And when you merge all your ideas together, everybody's message gets drowned out. So,
Uh,
go ahead. I'm
Real,
sorry.
real
Go ahead,
real
Marco.
quick, before we go, one thing, Wendy, also, the younger generation, I feel like can do is use what's at your fingertips. Like you guys have knowledge of the internet, knowledge of social media, and you guys understand it way more than older people like Pastor D. You know what I'm saying? So use
I
that.
think that was a shine. I think that was a shine.
Shade. Shade.
Use that, and post when the booths are open. Post what people are saying, because your pages, your Instagram, your Twitter, your TikTok, and all other ones that are out now, people view those things. And while they can be on their social medias just looking at stupid stuff, by you just posting something
Mhm.
that can change the world, they might stop and take a look at it. And that could be your way of touching somebody else.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think that's already happened. Like,
Yeah, like,
we all heard about the Trump rally that got messed up because of TikTok, and me and Wendy literally both signed up for it. It was, I mean, it was something that we did for fun, and then it ended up having a huge impact.
yeah, like, to be honest, one was just like, just sign up. And I was like, but why? And now they think I'm a Trump supporter, but, that's fine.
It's fine. We
But
still,
yeah, I
Well,
definitely
I want to
do.
segue into this since we're talking about it. What does it mean to be progressive today, especially among young people?
being progressive is
Oh.
kind of a radical idea. Because
But it's
as
not. It's not a
It's
radical.
not.
yeah,
That's the
It's
thing. You
really
gotta
Like
not.
recognize
it's
Correct.
it's
not.
only radical
radical
to
in the
people who
terms of
don't believe it.
the past, I guess, because we have, like, obviously I know people who are on like both sides of the spectrum, people who are very, very progressive and people who are very, very conservative. Um, all the people I hang out with are progressive, just because we obviously get along better. But like, I think we're moving past kind of the idea of capitalism as a social structure, because we see that it runs on the exploitation of someone, whether that person Black people, homeless people, poor people. Like it obviously doesn't work unless somebody's at the bottom. And like it's kind of like an ethical thing too. Like, why is it that the richest people in the world are praised for having money that they can't even spend within their lifetime, their children's lifetime, but there are people who are dying of hunger, and people who are in the middle, like middle class, lower class, are the ones who spend a larger portion of their respective salaries helping people in need than billionaires. If there's something that you can be doing, you should be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. How do I word this? I feel like progressive to me just means like you just have a basic understanding of empathy and caring for people. I feel like being progressive is kind of the bare minimum, because I'm just like, if you care about people, of course you're not going to want a multi-trillionaire to be exploiting his workers still to this day, while there's people that are considered middle class, but they're still extremely struggling or very close to being in poverty. Or even just compare a billionaire to everybody else, none of us are on the same level playing field as a billionaire.
Like, we're all so much closer to being destitute than being billionaires. So when we go, oh, Jeff Bezos is a great businessman, yeah, because he doesn't pay his workers. So, I mean, I just think we have kind of shifted the focus around like not only just celebrity culture, but the expectations that we should have for each other.
Because living in a
Sorry.
No, I think Marcus and I were saying the same thing. The idea of progressiveness being radical is like, it's a misnomer. It's something that I think certain people in establishment uses to scare people as a scare tactic, because when you speak to most Americans, the things that quote unquote progressives want to do, they agree with. And I think yesterday I told you guys that most people in the country lie somewhere in the middle, and it's a smaller percentage that are extremely far right and extremely far left, right? And so the idea that like, if you talk to most people in this country, they agree with having a living wage. If you talk to most people in this country, they agree that like there should be some form of healthcare given to people. If you talk to most people in this country, the idea that like, especially after the pandemic, that your job should not be tied to your healthcare, or that that like equal justice for all is just as important, and that, you know, the idea that the environment is important. So all of these like things that like are trying to be seen as like a radical thing, most people agree with. And so I think that it's a misnomer to say radical, right? Like it's not. It's just like, you're like, I just want everybody to be like, to live a good life. And then that's when you hear people say, well, then you want socialism. And I think my biggest pet peeve is like the people who say that you're like a socialist, a communist, a Marxist. And I'm like, I can't be all three, choose one, and then tell me the definition of each, right? And so I think what happens is that kind of going back to the idea of tribalism and politics, is that because you want to change certain things that happen within the institution, even racism, people think that it's a front, or almost like you are changing something too quickly and they're not comfortable with. That's the radical part about it, right? Like, because they're so used to a system in the past that if you want to change it quickly, which is what I think young people are like, I think that's the difference. Like, I'm in Generation X. Generation X was like, well, it's changing, trotting along, where Generation Z is like, no, we want it changed, and we want it changed now. That's the radicalness of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
but I want to piggyback off of what you're saying too, because I don't believe that being radical, I mean, being progressive makes you radical, because these are common sense things that should have been done a long time ago. People just said freeing slaves was radical, when we all agree at this time that it was the right thing to do and it needed to happen immediately. Climate change
Right.
is an issue that needs to be addressed immediately. The poverty system, the mass incarceration system, these are all things that need to be addressed immediately. There are a lot of conservatives that disagree, but I mean, they've already proven to negatively impact this country. So I do think it's up to the young people to inform themselves and make themselves knowledgeable about what's going on, because it's our lives that are going forward. The conservatives, they're usually the older, the baby booming generation. They're not going to be here for much longer. So I think it's very important for us to shape the future that we want to see. No, I'm serious. Because
Yeah,
we
she's right.
have to live with it.
She's right.
Have to deal with everything that they did so far, and it's affecting us. And what really frustrates me is the fact that this president has the nerve to say things that the older generation agrees with, and then people are now dying. So we have to, like I said, inform ourselves. I sound crazy. We have to inform ourselves so that we can have a better tomorrow, because we're the ones that are going to have to live in it. They're not going to.
Period. She said all the baby
They're
boomers
going to have
to
to
the
live through it. Like, they need to take a major back seat. I'm tired of it.
back.
Say it louder for the people in the back. I
Tired
love
of
that.
it.
I love that.
She said baby boomers to the back immediately.
I do have one more question. As we look into the future now, I don't know what's going on with this now. As we look into the future, um, election is coming up in November. What do we do? What are some of the things that we should be doing now as we are preparing ourselves to vote? Okay, I don't mean just show up on the day of election and look on the platform all the names that are listed on the Democrat and just choose them, or all the names that are registered on the Republicans and then choose these people as your candidate. What are some of the homework that we should be doing in preparation for election day? Woody, I'm gonna start with you.
Oh, great. Can I just shout out my Delta Sigma Theta vote
Yes,
shirt? Because I
yes,
am a proud
absolutely.
Yes,
I'm a
Soror.
proud member of Delta Sigma Theta, so I just want to throw that out there. And uh, proud member of the Divine Nine, and there's a candidate that's also part of the Divine Nine.
Whoop,
But
whoop,
since I'm
whoop.
not going to be endorsing a candidate on the AKA Kamala Harris, but that's another thing. Um, um, yeah, there are a couple things that we can do. One of the things that I think that you can do is you can first be informed of the candidate that you're going to be voting for on a local level and on a state level. I personally always say that the only person I agree with 100% of the time is myself. So I don't know any candidate that I would agree with 100% of the time. But make a list of policies and initiatives that are important to you. And then literally look at candidates and do a checklist. And if that candidate fills out hits more of the things on your checklist that you agree with, vote for that candidate and don't necessarily look next to if they're an R or a D on it, right? I think that's super important. I think that we can use our power. And if you want to become a single issue candidate, then that's fine too. But I think it's important to have more checks than have one issue. Phone banking for a candidate is also extremely helpful. You can go and, it's at the time of the pandemic, so going from door to door is not as easy. So phone banking for a candidate is extremely helpful. Sharing voter information with your friends through the social media. I had sent an article earlier where it was like a detailed, and Monday, if you can put that in the description later, it'd be great, like a detailed kind of glossary of what you need to know for each state, whether you need to, have, you can use absentee versus mail-in ballot, or, and if you need an ID, or, just the different, just knowing that, right? And also knowing the difference between an absentee and a mail-in ballot, which we'll probably come back around to. The other thing is that I will be volunteering at a polling station. Most often, people who are senior citizens go and volunteer at polling stations, but because of COVID, they aren't going to be able to do that. So I have decided to volunteer the day of. Another thing you can do is find local organizations that are help transporting people. If you are able to drive, or if you can just organize it. I know in the South they have Souls in the Polls, where churches get buses of people and take them to polling stations. If you can organize something like that, that is also helpful. And then just being really, really cautious about what information that we are spreading on social media, and making sure that it is the right information. So those are just like things off the top of my head that we can do. Most importantly is staying informed. Um, and secondly, just taking time out and just giving a little more of yourself, and and helping the people around you, because the pandemic is real. And so we have to be vigilant, and also voter suppression is real, and so we have to be vigilant, um, and diligent on what we are doing as informed voters, and going out and making sure that our voices are heard in this election.
Well said. Marcus, I don't know if you want to add anything to the list. We're asking what are some of the things that we should be doing right now as we are getting ready for election day?
Well, the biggest thing is actually, for me, the biggest thing is actually rewinding before November. It's being ready for what's happening in April and May and June. That's primary season. Um, Typically, when you get to November, you just have the candidates who won their primaries who are going to be represented in the general election. What I recommend is people invest their time after November to get ready for the next upcoming primary, because most primaries have very, very important positions that people are running for. And they have multiple people running for the nomination of their respective party. So when you have, local judges, you have state representatives, state senators, governor, municipal judges, sheriffs. Like sheriffs are elected positions. In on the local level, judges are elected positions. So you know, let's think of the election that happens every year rather than the election that happens every four,
Hmm.
Yes,
Yep.
because that is
absolutely.
the most important thing. We I think the biggest thing about the United States is we're so wrapped up in the big elections that we don't focus on the smaller ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and that's the biggest thing. We need to focus on every year rather than every four. And
Yes.
every year there's an important election. There's an important election every single year, whether you may not notice it, but it is important. Like last
So,
year in Pennsylvania, we had state judges, we had state Supreme Court seats up. Yeah, we had state Supreme Court, we had Attorney General. People who are elected into positions who would determine cases like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all these other things. Those are the type of
Right.
positions that we need to
mhm,
focus on.
mhm.
That's my 2 cents.
So, Marcus, I want to go back to a statement you made earlier, as far as whether or not our voting do matters. And I think we're going to close with that. I don't want anyone to live under the premise that it really doesn't matter whether we vote or not. Um, I know you mentioned how, in a way, it doesn't matter when it comes to who's going to be the president of the United States, but it does. I want you to take a moment to kind of we phrase your statement, if I may. Um, why does voting matter? Especially, I have the young people who are part of the show and those who are watching. I don't want to leave with them thinking, our votes don't really matter. There are some,
Right.
I believe they do matter, and you mentioned how it matters in some ways, especially if we don't wait for
Mhm.
November.
So
Hmm.
the reason why I say it may not matter on the day of the general election in terms of the presidential election. I'm only speaking that opinion that I gave was only in reference to the presidential election and in terms of the electoral college and the flaws within it. But
Correct.
In terms of
Correct.
every election underneath that, it doesn't matter what election it is, whether it's the Senate, the U.S. House, your governor, your state house, your state representative, your state house, your state house and your state senate, or whatever it's called, your assembly, your local, your mayor, your city council or commissioners, whatever the case may be. Those elections are an election where every single vote counts. Every single vote. I have my state representative who in my area. He won his election in 2004. He won his first election in 2014, and he won his election by 82 votes.
Wow.
82. That's out of 6,000 people that voted. 82 people made a difference. So in that regard, every single vote counts. I don't want to tell anybody that your vote doesn't count, but I will tell you that when you're going to make your decision come November for the president, you should at least do some type of research. Now is the perfect time. We have, less than 40 days. No, not less than 40. Less than 60 days until the election. So now is the perfect time to go on Joe Biden's website, read his platform. Go on President Trump's website, read his platform. Even if you may not agree with President Trump and you may not agree with Vice President Biden, it's always important that you learn what they're trying to do, what they aim to do for this country, and then put your vote in that person. And even if President Trump or Vice President Biden isn't the person for you, there are other parties out there. Now, I understand it's a two-party system, and some people may believe that if they put their vote somewhere else that isn't into the top two candidates, then their vote doesn't count. That's not entirely true. Your vote counts because it's a vote that you put your faith into. So it's all about, it's like, you have parties like the Green Party. You have Jill Stein, who's running again, who ran in 2016. She's running again in 2020. You have the Libertarian Party. They had Gary Johnson in 2016. I don't know who their candidate is this cycle, but if you don't want to put your faith in those two parties, you can always put your faith in another party or put your vote into another party. Your vote matters. Your vote matters 100%. If you don't feel like your vote is going to matter in terms of Biden or Trump, then put it in a candidate who you researched and will do good by you, or you feel will do good by you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any final words? I want to jump to Jimmy. If you can hear us, I just want to hear from you a little bit as we move closer to election. Any final words on people of your generation? What would you say to them right now?
It's pretty much the same. Get informed and vote with facts and not emotions. Look at the politicians' history, what they say they would do versus what they've actually done. Because their history is going to repeat itself. If they said they were going to, stop putting black people in jail, and then when they became whatever party they were, they voted to put more people in jail. Then what's going to change? Nothing. They're going to keep doing the same thing anyway. So let's be informed about the history of the politicians that we're voting for, and look at the platforms that they're standing on, and see if it matches up with their trends, with what they've been doing for
Well
their
said.
political career.
Marcus, I want to take a moment on behalf of the Remedy to say thank you. I know, like I said earlier at the beginning of the show, I know this was last minute and you were probably on your way to work and whatnot, but we appreciate you for taking the time to stop by and kind of be the voice that we needed, so that we can understand this politics better.
Rudy gave me a run for my money, so I don't know if you need it.
Well, welcome to the Remedy.
So are we saying Rudy for president? Are we going that
Hey, Rudy in 2024.
Yeah, Rudy.
No.
I'll be your running mate.
Politics.
Yeah. So and a special thanks to the member of our panels today. The Woody doesn't like that word, but the gang of the Remedy. It was indeed a wonderful show.
I
just
don't mind the
want to
word.
take
I just didn't know we were in a gang. I
yes,
didn't know if I needed to be
yes.
initiated or no. I didn't know.
No. We're not doing that. Not now.
Listen. At the end of the day, voting is a fundamental way that we let our government know what we need, what the issues that are important to us, and how we feel about the issues, and what we want our government to do. As you heard today, before you vote, do your homework. I believe it is up to you to be a good steward of information, to fact check yourself. Take ideology with a grain of salt and make decisions based on facts rather than gossip, or decision based on facts rather than what you just hear on the news or read on the internet. Um, I do believe it is a critical time in the history of our country, that it is important for us to be informed, and for those of you who have a Christian view, to see what our biblical responsibility is, um, with the government, and not to simply withdraw and avoid. So we encourage you to go vote on November 4th. With this, I want to take a moment to thank you again for being with us today. Thank you, Marcus, for stopping by. And I want to pray for this country. Father God, in Jesus' name, I ask that as we have discussed today, that what you are in charge of is you are in charge of the end of time. You know how this world will end. But as far as who is elected for president, and mayor, and congressmen and congresswoman, Lord, you leave this up to us. It is our duty, our responsibility to make sure we do our homework and to vote for people who will fight for the rights of our brothers and sisters. We are our brother's keeper. So it is our responsibility to use our civic duty to educate ourselves and to make conscious decision, and to put people in power that will represent you and represent you well. Father God, I ask that your blessing will be upon this country, that your blessing will be upon your leaders, that those who are appointed will remember, Father God, that they are appointed to represent those who need a helping hand. They are appointed to represent those who are at the bottom, who need someone who will fight for them. We thank you for today. We thank you. We hope that what we have done today will help someone to understand the importance of getting out there and vote. We thank you. We love you. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you
Amen.
so much, family. Until next time, take good care of yourself and take care of each other. Goodbye.